Welcome to Breakaway, the minor hockey podcast brought to you by the Ontario Minor Hockey Association. I'm Aaron Wilbur, your host, founder of the Coaches Site. As always, I'm joined by Ian Taylor, Executive Director of the OMHA, and returning for his second stint on the podcast is Big Mike, Michael Dundas, the Manager of Hockey Development for the OMHA. It was so good last time. We had to do it again here. Mike, how you doing? Ian, good to see you.
Good. Thanks for having me back, Aaron, so quickly. Appreciate it.
You got
it. Good. It's good. We're right into it, right? I mean, we're into hockey season. So, I mean, I know we're all energized by that. We're, yeah. I mean, we're jacked to be talking about hockey starting up. Tryouts were just about through. Tournaments will be starting up. We've got that later start, and then regular season. I mean, so it's all upon us. Timing is awesome.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what, from a good news standpoint, I think this is good news. I had a few conversations in the last week with people involved with minor hockey. And, sort of the feedback was we're so into it now. It's almost like the pandemic never happened. Like you almost have to remind yourself. It's like, oh yeah, we didn't really play normally. We're just in the thick of it. So I'm going to call that a win. I think that feels good. And, but today, fellas, I hope you got a cold glass of milk because we're gonna take down a couple spicy meatballs. We're gonna talk about cross ice hockey, and I think from my perspective, this might be, if we look back, I don't know, say the last 10 years, like this might be the most polarizing topic in our game at the grassroots level. So just maybe Ian, just starting with you, what's just your overall take of from the time of when this was introduced to where we are today, and just the various feedback that you would have received?
I think when we first introduced this being part of the Hockey Canada player pathways and specifically U9 and below and modified ice, cross ice or half ice, in one hand. That had been around for 20 years, right? Like it had been around through the initiation program and the benefits of cross ice. And we had shared all of those. And in a lot of recreational programs, it was the go-to, it was the way you played. So it existed, but it wasn't across the board. So that was the big jump, right, Aaron? Like when you're talking about, jumping the shark here, that was it. It was implementing it for everybody. So again, our task there was to talk about why now, what the benefits are, both short-term and long-term. And again, as part of our pathways and creating a progression. And really at the end of the day, it's to give those players the right start in the sport. And more than anything, allow them to have some degree of success and, most importantly, fun, because those two things will determine if the player comes back. And that's probably the newest conversation we're having. It's really not about cross ice and benefits and station-based practices and fundamental skills. I mean, we've been talking about that stuff forever. We've implemented it here in a formal way, but really, for the first time, we're talking about what do we have to do to give kids a great start in the sport so they'll keep playing, right? Like That's the new combo. So that's where we're at. And I'll just before I there's a long-winded answer to your question, but just before I move on, I know last week we talked, or in our last episode, we talked to Mike about, and Mike and I coached together, and from I'm going to say novice and up, we now call that U9 and up. Right. But Mike and myself and a guy we coach with, Dave Crozier, we actually ran an initiation program for a year. And so I give Mike credit. He is, he works in hockey, with us at the OMHA, but Mike is the single best minor hockey coach volunteer I've ever come across, because he's worked from IP to midget, house league, A, AA, AAA. So I wanted to mention that because it's not all theory. Like we got our nose dirty at some of these age groups. You know what I mean? And I was involved largely as a parent. Was involved in this IP program as a we worked with our association and we put it together, and we would put together a weekly plan for coaches. And they would do that for Mike, 3 weeks. And then the fourth week, Dave and Mike would go out and they would run a session, or maybe I guess they started with a session and then the coaches ran for the next 3 weeks. And then they came back out, ran a session, and then the coaches ran the next 3 weeks. So it was important for us. We provided the curriculum, but those guys would go out and run the session. And kind of the teaching concepts that we wanted to instill in that period of time. And then they would hand it off to the coaches. So we weren't taking coaching we were developing coaches and players, I guess is the way to best say it, Aaron. So anyway, I know I'm going kind of sideways here, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned that, because again, I think, it's great to have, people in the programs, developing curriculum and helping, especially at the younger age groups. But it's not just players we're trying to develop, it's coaches too. So I just didn't want to miss speaking to that. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm on a soapbox a little bit, but I just wanted to share that.
Oh man, Mike, I feel like no worry. That was I
thought we were talking about modified ice, and I'm almost in tears. Like first 5 minutes. No tears. That comes later. We'll work.
Well, but I mean, on that note, Mike, the fact that, again, I think what's kind of neat here is I think all of us have kind of been in the trenches, so to speak. And, so I mean, just from your observations, and I think it's interesting now, we're at a point now with cross ice hockey, and, Ian, you touch on the station-based practices as well, where there's been enough of a runway where for a lot of people joining the game, there wasn't a change. That's just all they knew. So I throw it to you, Michael, just having seen a couple of age groups flow through this development process. I mean, where do you think we're at? Are we seeing positive strides perhaps compared to where we were?
Yeah, definitely. I would even go back just to that 1 year, from our first kind of sessions in October to where we got to in February and March. From the player side, the coach side, the parent side, the expectations, what they knew they were getting into is, it's caught on really quick from everyone. They see the benefits, they see the positive of the program, how it's set up. And I mean, it's not new anymore, especially when you go to the rink. You go to the rink early morning now around here, and you'll have coaches pulling boards out onto the ice to divide the ice up. It's an efficient process. I know the first couple of years I helped some associations, and it took a while. They were building gaps in between their ice times just because of putting those boards together. But now it's real quick, it's real efficient. So I think it's caught on. I think you see the benefits. I think you see the benefits just from even the increase in skill level, especially in tight spaces, and what younger athletes can do nowadays with the puck, without a puck, how they can, work off one another. That all comes back to station-based, smaller areas, tighter spaces, having those opportunities, everyone having those opportunities, not 1 or 2 or 3 players excelling in those situations and having those opportunities all the time. So I think it's good, and I think it's only going to help improve our game as from today forward.
One thing that's interesting is, Ian, you talked about when this was introduced. So just in doing some research and preparing for this conversation, there's some great information out there that's online. But when I started referring back to it, because I know there's some great data, and we'll touch on this in a second, but I looked at of when the information came out, and I'm like, 2013, 2014. I think one thing that I've taken away is that we probably need to do a better job, just as a overall hockey administration, of let's not assume that just because it's the way it is that we don't need to continue the education process and remind people of why we do this, because I think a lot of that information is dated. And if your kids just started playing hockey in the last 3 or 4 years, it's maybe fair to say, hey, how come we don't play it on the big sheet like the NHL players, the game that I see on TV, and we can say, oh, well, here's the rationale. And then the second point I'll add is that, to me, this is less about cross-ice hockey, and it's more about finding alignment with all the adults in the room on what we believe leads to good development, i.e., hey, do we believe that more puck touches helps players get better? Yeah. Okay, great. Do we think that playing in smaller areas, where there's a bit more traffic, do we think that helps? Yeah. Okay, great. And it's like, okay, well, basically we all agree on that. Now, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And so maybe on that line, like, Ian, what's some of the commentary that you see as maybe some of the reasons of why we should not be doing cross-ice hockey?
Sure. You know what, Aaron, your initial statement is, you might as well have been sitting in one of our staff or development meetings, and that was it. That was, we did, probably one of our best launches of a new program with regards to U9 and below, and specifically modified ice for games, cross ice for 8 and below, and half ice. No, how does it go, Mike? It goes cross ice for
7 and below, cross ice.
Half ice for you. Yeah, U8 half ice, so divided at center, and then U9 again half ice, and then transition to full ice January 15th. So there's a clear cross, half, and then half to full, right? So probably the best launch we'd ever done in terms of providing information, the stuff you talked about, more puck touches, more engagement, more shots on goal. Everyone involved, everyone having a chance to touch the puck, where the better player just doesn't, get outside and is able to go, right? And then the whole group kind of chasing. So the whole concept of right sizing the environment based on the age and size of the kids. So again, we reached out to, we took into what the kids' experiences now. What happens at school? Smaller desks, smaller chairs. Makes sense. Hooks are lower. Okay, good. That's an easy one. Then you get into other sports. Soccer has done a phenomenal job of it. From they have different sizes for like 7 and below, 9 and below, 11 and below, like before they actually get to 11v11, right? Smaller base pass, or even if you get into pitching in baseball, shorter distance to the plate, basketball, lower hoops, tennis, cross ice on tennis program, or cross court on tennis program. So they're like, right sizing makes sense. And I think if you can said that to any parent or person, they'd go, yeah, that makes sense. Smaller bikes. I mean, you can go on, right? Smaller bats, smaller sticks, lightweight puck. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't ask kids in grade 1 to do book reports on War and Peace.
There you go.
We give them the ABC book or whatever.
Sure.
It is. It's so logical. And it's, it's funny. I was thinking about this. It's like, and I think this goes back to your comment about, making sure the kids enjoy the game and they stick with it. Like, can you imagine if you were learning tennis and you get out there, you're on the court and you're all following the ball, and you never got to swing at the tennis ball through the entire match? Like, what are the odds that you're going to continue playing tennis? Or you went out and played a round of golf and you just walked the course, but you actually never took a shot. And I think about this. So my little guy's playing soccer, and as you said, like, he's playing on the little fields. He's never come home and said, I just played a mini soccer game. He comes home and says, I played a soccer game, and he's pumped. And but I look at it, but there's kids even in that small environment where they can go the whole game without touching the ball, and you can see, like, without that, it's not fun. So I think, like, that is such a fundamental piece here, is keeping kids in the action. So
exactly.
I think that's really
Aaron.
Well said.
So Aaron, your second point is, where are we hearing the challenges are? So I mean, overall, the feedback has been really good. I would say overall, and we've heard those stories of, my son or daughter, got to touch the puck and was, more involved, and So that's happened. But now the question then becomes, are we grouping players properly by skill level and whatnot, depending on how many players we have? But we'll put that one aside. But we're getting into, okay, well, what about the kids are bunching up. So there's, the play is just a mob, of around around the puck. You have questions about players not being able to get to top speed. You get questions about this is one that becomes about not learning the rules, right? About they don't know what icing and offside is. Well, again, for all of these, these are things that would be involved in that transition period at U9 to full ice. I mean, we can teach offside. I mean, we have games, and I'm sure when we post this, Mitchell can post a video that we have about teaching offside using a cross ice game. Like there's lots of creative ways that ultimately we can teach that. That's not going to be a barrier to anybody. That's not going to be an ongoing challenge to players. So I think there's ways we can address this stuff.
Well, I would just like to point out that, like, when you watch the NHL draft, they do the breakdown of kids, like Bob McKenzie or, Elliot Friedman, who does the analysis. Nobody said, oh gosh, well, this kid's got a really good grasp of offside. Like, that's why they're picking him this high, is because his acumen for offside is just on point. And man, you should see this kid ice the puck. I haven't heard that yet. So apparently that can be figured out later on.
So, yeah. So, you're on it. You got it. You're right on it. So, but these are things I think, so what we end up always talking about is the game, right? Well, how else can we influence? Well, we influence a practice, not in the game environment, the training environment. So we talked about station-based practices to teach skills, but practice is an opportunity. You can start introducing concepts. We can start introducing spacing on players, and support and all these things. These are things we can teach, in our drills and a practice. Yeah. So then you can use them in the game, right? So it just becomes so game focused, Aaron. And we want it to look like the NHL. Like that, I guess maybe that's the issue. And Mike, we're going to add it to you, but I just, on that point, so here, and I'd be curious to know if you guys have the situation. So here in Vancouver, there's a couple of associations that have access to mini rinks, right? So if you take the dimensions, it's the same as cross ice, but there's boards. So it looks like, and they have benches on the side, so it's a mini rink. And I've heard so many parents say, well, that association over there, those kids have an advantage because they don't play cross ice hockey. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They play on mini rinks. They're like, no. They play like on hockey rinks, so it's the same. And I'm like, it's the same thing. And they're like, no, but it's a visual perception. And at the end of the day, I'm like, so what you're really saying is you just want your kid to look like they're playing in the game you see on TV. That's what a big part of this is. And I just think that's a really good point. Michael, when it comes to, Ian talks about educating coaches. How do we educate coaches about the benefits and maybe what are some of the things that you would point to get to ensure that they're, I guess, relaying the right information and understanding that this is for the benefit.
Yeah, the pathways alone, just those pathway documents, the player pathway documents have a ton of background into why this is better for the younger player. It's about scaling the game. It's about focusing on, the fundamental skills. But there's tons of resources on it and that can support coaches. From even just game rules and how to apply them at a modified ice programming. And Ian touched on a good point. It doesn't have to happen in a game situation. It doesn't have, but it can happen in the practice environment. But conversation we had actually last week was, why does it have to happen on the ice? We have so many coaches that provide, video sessions with their older groups. It's trickling down to, you see it at U11, U10 now that they're having video or pregame video or feedback through video. why can't coaches do an off-ice session where they go out into the parking lot after a practice and they lay down a blue line, red line, blue line, and they can teach icing there? Or maybe it is a Zoom call or a video session in the dressing room where they can go through the game fundamentals and those rules. And, you know, kids now are extremely visual learners. I find not as many kids learn through audio as they do by feel, touch, and doing and seeing. So I think there's a great opportunity that you could take it out of the formal practice on ice environment or the game environment and teach it in a lower stress setting, and you can move players around. So there's lots of opportunity there. Hockey Canada Network app is a great one for coaches to point to. They can break down by skill, by age, by level. So there's a lot of opportunity for coaches to get into those resources and help support them with their seasonal plan.
The Coaches Site is a proud partner of the OMHA, along with many of the top development organizations in the world. The Coaches Site was created to provide hockey's top coaches, leaders, and performance experts with a platform to share their experience and insights with amateur coaches and minor hockey organizations, with the goal of enhancing the development opportunity for all players. A membership includes access to 500 hours of educational videos, a library of over 700 drills, articles breaking down the latest tactics and systems, and our newly released Initiation Skills Series, which provides a video-based development curriculum for the first 3 years of a player's minor hockey career. Regardless of the level you coach, the Coaches Site is going to provide you the ultimate coaching toolkit. Listeners of the Breakaway podcast can save 25% off an annual membership by using the code OMHA when they register. Again, use the code OMHA and get registered today.
Yeah, so for anybody watching, what I'm grabbing here, see, there's a guy I have on my shelf.
Is that Stamkos?
No, that's Victor Hedman.
Oh, okay.
So anyway,
so we got a mini Victor Hedman. Okay,
we got a mini Victor Hedman.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
I can tell you when I was coaching. No, it was full ice. It would have been yeah, but it was the year before as well. I did it. So, and it was full ice, but the kids still, we had gone from half ice or cross ice the year before, and then full ice. So we took our coaching board, laid it flat on a table, and brought a bunch of these guys out, and that's how we taught offside. Just as you, Mike, said that, that was a flashback. So we put all these guys on the coaching board flat, and spoke about, the player preceding the puck and all that. So like there's no short, and kids, like you say, kids are visual, low tech versus Mike's talking high tech. But there's no shortage of ways you can be creative, and kids, they like seeing the little hockey players and all that sort of stuff. Right. So like there's lots of ways to teach this. That's where the creativity kind of comes from, and it'll stick too. I promise you.
Well, there's also, and I'm going to dive into some stats here, but there's also the analog way to teach that, Ian. So, back when I was involved as a hockey director, this was not my idea. This was adopted from, through the association over time, and they had an idea which I thought was really good. They said, okay, in the second half of the season, so after Christmas, U8 players every Saturday. 2 teams were going to come together, and they got a 45-minute session to play a scrimmage game on the big ice for the purpose of getting familiar with the line changes, getting familiar with the big sheet of ice, offsides,
Sure.
etc. And the coaches would be out there running the show. So it makes a lot of sense. And I thought that was a really good bridge. But what was interesting, and the parents are like, they're showing up like it's the goddamn Super Bowl. Like they're making it, which is awesome because the enthusiasm's great.
Right.
What was interesting is the kids in that 45-minute ice time, their feedback. This is boring because we got to stop and explain the offsides. Well, the line changes. Well, the line changes when 8-year-olds, they take forever. And the kids were like, we just want to go back to where we just play hockey and touch the puck and try and score goals. And it was every ice time. And again, so I think there's a part of this. Let's listen to the kids.
Out of the mouths of babes, yes, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is really interesting. And I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I remember when this came out, it was kind of cool. And I think it's worth sharing. So back in 2017, USA Hockey
Yeah,
at Joe
I know where
Louis
you're
Arena,
going.
which it was at the time the home of the Detroit Red Wings. They took a group of U7 players and they had them play a game cross ice and a game on the full ice. And they literally brought in like the tracking systems, like the analytics they use in the NHL, and they got some raw data. So here's what they found. If you feel that touching the puck is important in a player's development, well, players in cross ice touch the puck twice as much. They made 2 times as many pass attempts. This is interesting. They had 6 times as many shot attempts. They received 5 times as many passes. They were in twice as many puck battles. They changed direction twice as much. And man, oh man, to the comment about full speed, Ian, when you look at an NHL game, if you talk to any NHL skill development coach, any NHL head coach, I guarantee you they will talk to you that the change of direction is what separates players at that level versus speed. And the goalies had 4 times as many shots per minutes. And when you look at it like that, it's like, gosh, like that all seems like really important stuff.
And Aaron, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say for that study, it was I want to say it was like a U9 Little Caesars team. Like it was a good team, meaning a double A or a triple A level team.
It was 8U, and I'm looking here. Yeah, I'd have to confirm, but I believe like the kids definitely look like.
I think it was, and so these were, again, for that age level, kind of higher skilled players. Let's use that as a descriptor, and so meaning they could execute these. They could pass the puck. They could like they were doing those. They were playing hockey. So I think that's important because I think it gives some context there. I really like your point about the skating overall, and I mean, again, Aaron, you have more engagement with professional NHL, European coaches than anybody. So I mean, the days of the 200, skate behind your own net and wheel the whole ice surface, they're not happening too much. I mean, to me, it's coaches are everything about 10-foot races, right? Quickness, gathering loose pucks. I mean, I can tell you the way we've changed how we, what our focus is on skating. When Mike and I, when we coach, when we teach skating, when we first started, we were doing a lot on striding, right?
Yeah.
Like the perfect stride, and we were all trying to, emulate this in all players. And when we found people just have different mechanics. They don't all move the same way. So our focus changed completely to focus on edges. That's all we do now. We again, 2 foot, inside and outside, then 1 foot, and then transitioning on 1 foot, spending most of the game on 1 foot is and so that's where we spend all of our time. All of our time in skating is edge focus. And then it becomes a skill focus as opposed to the feeling that we're just skating, we're just, or condition skating. It was actually, it's actually giving them a skill that's simple weight shift. Weight shift is my favorite skill in the world. And I tell everybody and they think I'm crazy, but it's the simplest skill to work on. And it's every player can implement that into their game. So, our whole focus of how we teach it has completely changed. So why would that not, land where we're starting? Aaron, we've talked to experts on shooting the puck. Tim Turk. People don't shoot the puck the same way anymore. Technology's different. The way you hold the stick in your hand, the way you flex it, right? Like, so skating's changed too, completely. How we teach it and then how the game's played. Everything is so quick, as you said, tight turns, evasiveness, ability to change the direction, pivot, all that, right? the comment I make to people is the moment when you do go to full ice at U9 when we transition and forevermore, the ice surface from that point on is getting smaller. From that point on, because players are getting bigger faster, right? So
yeah, 100%. And listen, it's funny, like back to the commentary from NHL coaches. And I think this is interesting and it speaks to the value of it is that so they play an 82 game schedule. There's very limited practice time. And of course, there's players that in the NHL might make a living from, they're kind of paid not to touch the puck a lot. It's like, hey, you get it out of your zone or you get it over the line or, you dump it behind the net and you bump into people, whatever. But what the coaches at that level with their limited practice time, they utilize not so much cross ice hockey, but they use small area games. But it's like, hey, we need these players to touch the puck because even if we're asking them to touch it a limited amount of time, we need them to execute and we need their reps. And with a 45-minute practice, we might get 2 of those a week, depending on our schedule. We get so much more out of the small area games and just getting those players their rep and handling pucks under pressure than we can replicate in drills or, a full ice scrimmage. And they said, otherwise these players, like, I mean, take your 5th and 6th defenseman on an NHL team. If they don't get those reps, then all of a sudden they barely touch the puck in a game because they're playing limited minutes and they just fall off. So it's just interesting from that, at that level that, their frame of mind is they see the value in these small area games. But, Michael, like from a strategic standpoint, what advice do you give coaches or would you advise to sort of, try and enhance those skills that players are going to require, I think, to be successful in cross-ice hockey?
Yeah, it goes back to fundamental skills, obviously. Like, they're still so young. They haven't perfected anything. They haven't had the 10,000 reps. Like, they have to work on everything. Skating is the key, I think, to it. There's got to be a lot of focus on skating. I think the other thing that gets missed in changing to modified ice, cross ice, half ice from full ice is kids at a younger age are having those moments of incidental contact. So they're getting comfortable being pushed off balance or
that's a good point.
bumping into one another. When you play in a full ice game and you're chasing all the time, it's almost like you're just doing like a power skating session on your own. You're still skating, you're still maybe transitioning, not as much, but you don't have those instances where you're shoulder to shoulder with another player and you're off balance or you're learning how to protect the puck or you're taking, some weight from another player and being able to stand on that 1 foot, which we teach in a skill setting, but when it happens naturally is when you really got to put it into action. Ian and I were talking about just last week on, how we learned, balance, and it was just running through the forest as kids. And if you go to hop the river, like, got to land on the one stone. And if you don't hold your foot and make that land and hold your balance to get over, well, you're wet.
Maybe that's how we should do tryouts.
Yeah. But there's all those little things that happen in those situations. But it comes back to breaking it right down to those skills, giving the kids, the players, the tools in their toolbox so that they can be successful once they're put into a game situation.
Well, I want to go back to Ian's point about how the game has evolved. So last week I had a conversation with the head of coach development for the Finnish Ice Hockey Association. And just to paint a picture of how the game is constantly evolving, I think it's really important that with all these changes in our game, and Ian and I have talked about this before, it's not like somebody at Hockey Canada or USA Hockey or wherever like shows up to work one day and says, hey, you know what, we're just going to do a 180 here and change the complete way we do it. Like, this is all research based. There's sports scientists involved. Like, these are decisions that are years in the making. But case in point, so in Finland, which I would argue might be the most progressive country when it comes to hockey development, they had sort of spearheaded the whole, cross ice hockey, station based practices, etc. But they've made a change based on feedback and based on data. And they've said at the U7 level, they're actually trying to move away from the the station-based practices. And they're moving more towards even more games. And the rationale is that when kids are learning to skate, they learn better when they're just in an environment in a pack and they can just sort of try and keep up with the the herd or the little swarm of bees that you see at the youth hockey level than they can from being instructed to go around pylons. So they're actually, but again, that was years of observations of collecting data. And they said, hey, so now we're actually at these levels. And then we steer them more into to the station-based games at the U8 level. And then obviously the transition to, the big ice. And so I just found that was really interesting where I think for everybody that's providing commentary, at some point, we have to be aligned on what we believe aids a player's development. So if that's, reps, touches, etc., then okay, let's agree on that. And the second part is saying, okay, like, who are we going to listen to? Are we going to listen to the people that spend all day consulting with, experts that are analyzing data, or are we going to listen to, the parent beside us on the glass that says, this is BS. We should be playing full ice hockey, and with no other substance other than that. It's just an observation that we should be playing full ice hockey. So that's my turn on the soapbox, Ian.
But I love it, and I love you the Finnish model, and I don't know if people are probably sick of us talking about Finland, quite honestly, but they just keep showing up or being relevant in our conversations. And when you say that, like I think of that, and you've got me spinning here. I'm thinking, okay, like, what boxes does that tick for those youngest players? Well, they're engaged, they're moving, they're using the skills without really even thinking about it, right? And I'll be honest, Aaron, like that's one for me that was eye-opening to me. That was a non-hockey example. That was my younger guy taking learn to skate program, and lessons I learned from those instructors. First, they'd have a bunch of stuff, right? They'd have bean bags. They'd have baskets. They'd have balls. So, kids were going and they had to grab a bean bag and put it in a basket 10 feet away. Well, they weren't thinking about skating. They were just doing the bingo, the action, the activity, right? Big one that I still use today. Mike and I carry around those big, the big wide Sharpie markers to write on the ice. We write on the ice, and they used either those or bingo dabbers. I think those were the two that people used. And they would write, they would draw this pattern on the ice, and the kids had to follow it, right? And I'm like that. So there's a coaching hack that I learned from skating. God, I don't know how many years that is now, but from skating instructors, that now we always have a marker in our pocket to show, patterns or whatever, and have stuff. That's the other thing I would say to coaches going to ice. Again, sticks, cut off sticks you can step over. Not just the traditional pylons and pucks. We used to take the little, and I'm sure you have them at home, Aaron, the little mini hockey nets, for basement hockey, knee hockey, whatever you call it.
That's how I started my day, Ian.
So I would take those to practice, and we would have.
Really?
It would be. Oh yeah. So because there was only so many nets, and we had 4 teams on the ice or whatever it was at that time, and again in our station, or 3 teams, and we'd put them out there, and it would just, if you could do this and then shoot it in the net and then pick up another puck, like, it was just whatever. It was just, I've told you before, it's easier to run a U15 practice than it is a U8 practice, because if one goes south, you got to have another one ready to go almost, immediately. And so that's the other thing I would throw at is again, create an environment where there's challenges. And I think that's, that was your point to start about having them kind of game-like situations, right? Play more. But also, again, introduce these things that they can maneuver around, think about, hop over, through, it's the attention. You keep their attention, you keep their engagement,
Well, I love where this conversation has gone now, just about, I think, ideas and how we can just focus on development, because that's, I think, what really matters. And just maybe to add some ideas to the pot, and then just, let's just go, for the sake of it, let's go back to Finland. Like, we've done some work with Jokerit, which is a club there. And like, one of their big ideas is they recognized the kids got really fascinated with that Red Bull crushed ice, or no, not crushed ice.
Yeah,
That's
crashed ice. Crashed ice. Yeah.
Crushed ice is for another activity.
That's later.
But so they created that for the kids. They used like the little, the padding, and they used the mini sticks where they got to step over. And they just created, and they said like eventually it just became a fun thing with the coaches to see who could come up with a date. And that's how they would start practices at the U8 level. And they're like, the kids loved it. And so they did that. And then, to your idea about the aids, and I think this is so interesting. So my little guy is he's in Learn to Skate right now. So it's like, the community-based program. It's, I think, everywhere in Canada. And so he's kind of gone from like, starting out. So now he's kind of in the group that they're doing some more advanced stuff, as advanced as you can be at 3 and 4. But so our neighbor, we have a family that moved beside us. They're from Australia. They've got a little boy, same age as mine, and they're of course we're comparing notes. So both our kids do gymnastics together, and they're like, Mackie, their son, they're like, hey, we signed Mackie up for the skating lessons. I'm like, great, awesome. They're like, does he need skates for that? And I'm like, yep, that's going to be he's definitely going to need skates for that. So we get Mackie set up with his skates, and he shows up. He's got his dinosaur gloves. Well, in his group, so they've got the 5 kids that are literally starting from scratch. The coach has a bubble maker, or a bubble gun, I guess it is. And it sprays bubbles. So the kids got to go chase the bubbles.
Sure.
And but the problem with the bubble makers, all the other kids that have already graduated from that stage, they're like, I want to abandon what I'm doing, and I just want to chase the bubbles. And then you can see, like, my little guy's like, I want to go do what they're doing because that looks like way more fun. So I think that creativity and those ideas, I think it's so important that we share those ideas because, and you hit the nail on the head, man. Like at that age, it's challenging. You got to keep it creative. You got to create it fresh. And again, I go back to the kids' feedback. Like, I have yet to hear a child complain about cross ice hockey. All I've heard is them just say, I played a hockey game today and it was fun. So,
that's it.
Michael, any other like further comments, again, just from being, I mean, you're having so many of these conversations with the people, out there doing the work. What any other ideas on how we can enhance it? Or
we have a guy that works with our coaches program, Tim McWhirter. He's up in Parry Sound, and he's like, at this age, U9 and below, kind of like the resources he has and the ideas he implements on the ice is like pretty impressive. He always has a skipping rope, like a double Dutch skipping rope out on the ice. And and he just gets kids skipping rope or playing helicopter and jumping over the rope, which is like balance and agility on that stuff. The other one I saw him use was bowling pins. So, come on, a big thing. What's the biggest thing that people have when they're learning to skate? Falling down. So now you're putting a kid in a situation where, how many pins can you slide through? So now they're going to just drop to their belly.
Oh my God!
Try and knock down as many pins as they can, and then right after that, they're working on standing back up onto their feet. So you're teaching skills, like you said, but now they're not focused on, I'm going to fall down on the ice and it might not feel great or whatever. It's like, I got to knock as many pins over as I can, or whatever it is. I think, and then the other thing I have, and it triggered when you were talking about, the parents losing their mind on the glass. We used to coach. We had a later session, but the U9 group, or it might have been U7 group, was on before us. And early in the season, I went and had a conversation. It was a grandfather, probably helping get kids to multiple sports. And I was like, what do you think of this? Oh, it's dumb. Why aren't we playing full ice? And I'm like, okay, like he doesn't know this is what I do from 9 to 5 all the time. But I ended up talking to him in probably February, March that year. I was like, oh, hey, we just ended up standing next to each other while I was waiting for our guys to get ready. I was like, how's it going? He's like, I love it. Just observing, right? Like, just observing. I can see the benefits. Kids have fun. They're more engaged. They develop more. So, I mean, don't knock it till you try it or see it, I guess, is the big thing for me. It is change. I know change is the hardest thing we as a society can go through, but I think there's so much benefit to the way U9 and below programming is taking place now that it's going to only benefit the athlete and our game and their experience, right? And we want hockey players for life.
Yeah,
it doesn't end at U18, U20.
1,000%.
We talk about it all the time. You're at U9, everyone's going to end up, whether you make it at the NHL or not, we're all going to end up at the same place. It's going to be the community rink playing with your buddies at whatever age if you love the game that much. So,
Yeah. You start and end at the same place. That's right. Exactly. What you do in between is up to you.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys. I got two things to maybe close on, and one I think is really relevant. Have you guys seen the CBC doc on the 72 series?
Yeah.
It's amazing. And one comment that came out of that was Bobby Clark talking about growing up in Flin Flon, Manitoba, and he just said, like, I learned to play the game because every day after school I went out. It was so damn cold. Like, we went and played on the lake. And he's like, that's where we learned. And he's like, small areas, just the kids. And he's like, I was playing with older kids. I had to fight for the puck. Yeah. And he goes, that's how I developed that's how I was taught, was just those small competitive type environments. So I thought that was really telling. But, to steer away from Finland as we close. So we do this, series of the coaches site called Hockey Factories. It's awesome. So we do a deep dive into, the top development organizations in the world. And we're getting ready for season 2. So we're talking with these organizations. So one of the organizations we're going to be profiling is Zug. So Zug is a little community about, it's less than 40,000 people. They have a team in the top Swiss professional league. They've won the league championship the last 2 years. And the story in Zug is the gentleman that owns the team was in pharma, and he developed a drug that, and I this is where I get lost in the conversation. But anyways, I just know that he developed a drug that at one point was like the top 5 pharmaceutical products in the world. So just to paint a picture, like, money is not even a question. So he says, I got my career started in Zug. I'm going to buy a hockey team, and I'm going to make sure that this is the best goddamn experience for kids and players and fans as it possibly can be. And again, money's not an option. So he builds this brand new facility. It's a couple years old. It's an unbelievable rink. But then they build like another training center with the offices and everything and a practice ring. And they're walking us through this PowerPoint and showing us videos, and they're even picking up their laptops. And we're like, oh my God, like, this is like the New York Yankees don't have this. And then they show us the PowerPoint on how they've gotten all these scientists and development and how to develop players the best way. And they've all this data, and we're like, and then they get to the slide of what they came up with. And guess what they came up with the best way to develop players is? Small area games, lots of reps, lots of touches. Like, they got to they didn't consult with Hockey Canada. They did this all on their own. Yeah. And they came right back to the same place. And a lot of it was looking at other sports and saying, what are they doing? And yet it just, just like we're all going to end up in beer league, the same place we started. It's the same place you start. It's like look at other sports, and it's for sure. It's no different. It's just, these are all, I think, really rational points. So anyways, I think one thing we're going to try and do is wherever if you're listening to this episode, if you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it on your favorite podcast, if you go to the OMHA site, if we do one thing, let's try and add some links with Mitch into the post so people can go back and look at some of the data that we refer to. Some great videos and resources out there. But
absolutely,
I really hope that this is, if anything, I hope this episode isn't viewed as maybe confrontational. I just hope it sparks a discussion and gives whether it be coaches, parents, just an opportunity to pause and say, okay, let's just step back for a second and look at what we're trying to. Can we get aligned on just how players develop as athletes and as hockey players? But great conversation again, guy. Mike, you might be locked in here. Like, you might have to block off Thursdays.
Let me know. I'll open the calendar.
I think you should. Yeah. Hey, Aaron, what I would say is, and I know you say you don't want to be confrontational. I kind of do actually want it to be confrontational, but I don't want it to be preachy. So there's a difference, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Because to me, like the reason we have this is because we want it to benefit the most amount of players for the long term, right? So when you give the example of Bobby Clark and he says, what else are you going to do in Flin Flon, Manitoba? Like that was one of the best quotes of that session. But in the same series, they're showing Anatoly Tarasov, that like all that's like you talk about skipping ropes and jumping and how cool is that footage? Oh, it's ahead of its time, right? And then using off ice to do a bunch of other stuff because they only had natural ice. They didn't have artificial ice. So they spent the rest of the year carrying around rocks and piggybacking each other up hills and stuff, right? Like, so it's crazy. But that speaks to, you use what you have available to you, right? Bobby Clark had a frozen pond. Tarasov was making stuff up. So like, that's where the challenge is for me. Like there's like, I think we're bringing all the best data forward. We're bringing the way to have more kids playing longer in the best environment possible, and then be creative, because I think there's lots of cool things that coaches can do and use. And last but not least, and we've talked a lot about this, is we don't, we don't have to be in such a rush. Let's put these things in place. Let's build a foundation, and kids will find their watermark the same way they do in Finland, the same way they do in the US, the same way they
1,000%.
do in Whitby, Ontario. You know what I mean? So,
I want to add, and I don't even know the right place for this to happen, but for anybody that's listening, and if you're a coach or you're a parent, if you do something that's really creative that you think is valuable, that can help other coaches, if you're a parent and you have a coach that you think is doing something really cool, if you went to your local rink and you saw somebody doing something that you thought was worth sharing, reach out. We'd love to hear those ideas, especially if anybody has it like on video, if a coach has happened to record it. I just think that there's so much value, because to your point, Ian, like at the end of the day, all the structural stuff doesn't matter. It really comes down to, as a coach, are they motivated and passionate about finding ways to connect with their kids to make them better? And
Right.
I think that like cross ice full, it doesn't, none of that matters. That's where the magic's going to happen. So if there's any ideas out there, let's share them. Let's make sure everybody's getting access to that information. And guys, this has been awesome. Again, thank you so much. And hope everybody out there enjoyed listening to this episode of Breakaway.